Welcome to episode 129 of the Necronama.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now. And every time Don says Frankenstein, he owes me $20.
And I am Don Guillory, author, historian, educator, co-host of this podcast. And I don't know what the hell he's talking about because that shit ain't happening.
It was worth a shot. I really need money.
Yeah, but we do have to note before we get to our guest, James. We have a sponsor for this episode. It's Frau Blucher. She's getting kickbacks for everybody this past year who has bought horse deworming medication. So.
Sweet, good for her. You said guest, but we actually didn't have a guest for this episode. So what I did is I went back through 39 of our other episodes and I pulled pieces of guests and I built today's guest. So Thomas Brungardt is here.
But we still need the brain, though.
Oh,
we'll try to get there.
Hey guys, I'm happy to be back on the Toxic Masculinity podcast.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
That's Joe Rogan's show.
How are you guys doing?
I'm good. I watched all of the Mickey Mouse Monster musical, and I think I'm really ready for this episode.
Perfect. I'm ready.
I listened to Thriller about 2 times in the last couple of days. So,
Dude, that's the Wolfman. That comes later in the month.
I know. I just kind of got ahead of myself.
So, Thomas, for people that haven't listened to half of our episodes, why don't you tell them a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, I'm a maker of videos and music. In fact, this movie was a movie that we sampled for a video for one of my old bands. And we didn't get any copyright claims on it, so it's still on the internet. But yeah, no, I've been on this before. If you haven't heard me, lucky you. And if you have heard me, you probably turned this off by now. So I'm just happy to be here, happy to talk about this stuff. And I just want to argue about why they decided to remake Jason Lives, because this is just a blatant ripoff of that movie to me.
So, no, really, this is seriously your 40th time on the show. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. You know, you did all the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror and several films, including Splice, which has very professional adult conversations about the genitalia of aliens, and people should check that out. But no, we're always happy to have you here because you fit right in with how much we hate ourselves and each other. So it's great to have you back.
Well, I was going to say, it's only been 40. It feels like 400 because it's just such a slog to talk to you people every time.
As the person that edits every
what do you
episode,
mean, you
I
people?
feel like even more.
Don, I apologize. That time it wasn't on purpose. That might make it worse that just came out that way. But
Good Lord.
you know what? I already feel ostracized and shunned like the monsters. So thank you for making me feel so unwelcome.
Absolutely. That's what we do here. No, that actually leads into exactly one of the main things I want to talk about today, which is we covered Dracula before this, and that's all about the fear of the outsider coming into your area and taking your women or whatever else and just infiltrating your society and changing it. And the monster is the direct opposite. The monster is the story of being the outsider. Mm-hmm. And so I think you fit in great because you just said that. So thanks.
You're welcome. I planned it days ago when I watched it.
I knew you would.
I've seen this movie probably a dozen times, and I don't think I've watched it in the last 10 years. So my viewing of it this time felt a lot different from when I was younger. So I wanted to know how you guys felt about watching it as an older person.
As an older person, I see how this is.
God.
No.
Well, you guys are much older than I am. So
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, my grandkids are older than you. So, for me,
I'm sorry. I just dropped my AARP card.
I hope somebody gets it for him. He can't bend over that far.
I was going to say, I thought you'd summon your nurse to pick it up for you.
Yeah, I'm not making that joke. All right, so bringing it back to your question, I hadn't seen this since I was probably 25-ish. I used to work overnights, and I would just put on these movies to pass the time. And even then, I wouldn't say that I paid a ton of attention to them, but they were just kind of on. But they were on like every weekend. I don't know what the fuck channel I was watching, but they were always on. And I think this is the first time I truly sat down and watched it like beginning to end. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I really have a difference from the past so much as it was amazing to me how much of Bride of Frankenstein is in my head as part of this movie. Okay. And so like watching them back to back, like I totally was like, oh, I must have seen that like 100 more times than this one or something. But that was my big change is I apparently found out that I didn't know as much about this film as I thought I did. So what about you, Don? You got something real to say instead of that?
Well, I think that was pretty real as it was. I mean, don't downplay what you were contributing. It's been a while since I've seen this film, and I think partially because of what I was going through at the period of having to stay with my dad, and my mom was at some officer training thing, so I was staying with him for 6 months, and I had to come to a new place for that time being, and I quickly became the outsider there. And I just became very just contrarian, very bullheaded about a lot of stuff. So I watched this movie because I didn't want to read the book.
They're very similar, and I think that worked out well.
I think I failed the quiz and the test. And I was like, but he dies in the end. There was a windmill. There's no fucking windmill. So I sucked it up and I ended up reading the book. And it was one of those things like, this is nothing like what's there. What the fuck is going on here? But for me, watching this as an adult and fully taking what's in, thinking about geopolitical issues in relation to this film stood out a lot more than it simply being, hey, it's some weird, creepy scientist who wants to reanimate the dead because he has this God complex. In fact, he refers to himself as God at one point. So there were a lot more things that I could see other than what was on the surface. And to be honest, having read the book, having watched this film, having watched some of the other variations of it, even Kenneth Branagh's one, I just feel as though this movie I don't want to say it did a disservice to Mary Shelley's work, but I think what it did is it did the same thing that we saw with movies like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, where you have the general idea of what the story was, but we changed so much to try and appeal to an audience as opposed to appeal to the literary source material.
The graphic novel of
yes.
that? Not the actual true story of Abraham Lincoln slaying vampires, right?
I don't think they've actually released that. It was a lot of black marker usage on those papers, so we're still waiting for the truth.
I think for me, when I was younger, it was a lot like James, where there was a channel on here that had like Monster Madness every week, and I would always watch those, and I would often watch Frankenstein. And having rewatched it now, there are times where I just got really, really bored. And it's not the film. I think we're just really spoiled with movies nowadays and how engaging movies can be. And this movie is only 70 minutes long, but at times it feels like it's 700 minutes long.
Oh, yeah.
I felt like it was never going to end. And I knew how it ended. Like I knew the progression of the story, but it just felt like it was taking forever to get there. And I mean, it's worth noting the movie is like 80 years old.
90.
Over almost 90 years. Yeah, 90 years old this year, I guess. And I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt, like, hey, this is almost 100 years old. I shouldn't be so critical of it. Then I went online and I was reading reviews that came out in 1931. And even the reviews were like, oh, it's pretty good. It was all right. It could have been better. So, I mean, I don't feel as bad thinking that, oh, maybe that, monster coming to life scene could have been better. Because even back then they thought this could have been better. But I remember my dad telling me stories about movies like this, and people would leave the theater just terrified because they'd never seen anything on film like that before. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But just to get it out of the way, just to talk about, this is an old movie before we get into the deeper meaning of it. I think as an old movie, it still holds up. The performances are good.
Oh yeah, I'd agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I totally see.
Go ahead. I was gonna say Thomas mentions the whole reference to how people would leave movies scared and things like that. I remember that was an issue for a while, even without the interactive, the buzzer seats and smoking theater rooms and stuff like that. Because even at the beginning of this film, there is the interlocutor who comes forward and says, "Hey, I just want to warn you, this movie's scary." Which
just like Marge in Treehouse of Horror.
Yeah, I was gonna say they bring it up.
Simpsons did it.
Simpsons did it first.
I recall even movies from the 80s, the 90s. I can't remember anything in the past 20 years that had that same type of reaction. But I remember reports of, Interview with the Vampire. Oh my gosh, there were people passed out in the movie theater, or there are people who walked out because they were so shocked by it. I think Saw might have had people who left because of the gratuitous violence or the blood.
Cloverfield, motion sickness.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But I mean, I can't imagine a film being done so well, or at least the shock value being so good or bad, depending on who you are. Being one of those things that's going to dissuade people from seeing it. I would see that even with this warning for this film, it's, oh, fuck it. It's not that scary. I'm going to go and watch this. And maybe somebody does get, scared shitless and walks out of the movie theater. But I couldn't see it with this movie. But then again, I mean, we've all been desensitized to what we see, which always drives me crazy when somebody says, "Hey, you couldn't make a movie like that today." You couldn't make the movies now back then because people would have flipped their shit.
Oh man, can you imagine? Take Saw back in time.
Well, you got to figure. I mean, you still in the 1930s, so there were people going to lynching. So I guess
people still talking about Jack the Ripper. One thing I really like about these old movies, it's kind of like a masterclass in filmmaking, and you're getting to see like the early days of how they progressed the story and moved it along visually. And I just love all the like stupid, like an establishing shot is just a picture of a sign that says where they are and what they're doing.
Yes,
right.
Or it's just like just big like exposition dumps where somebody's talking for 3 minutes just so like they catch you up with where the story's going, and then they skip several months and then they're just already doing something else, right? And that's one of the things I don't like about this movie is that you see them go through the process of stealing a brain, but you don't see him like testing his experiments. And there's no triumph when he does it because he does it on the first try, at least the first try you're seeing. So for me, I wanted more of like the process of creating the monster and the failures and all that. And then making the monster, that whole scene with the Edison bulbs and lightning. And it's like, oh, these Tesla coils, something's happening. And then it's kind of anticlimactic. But it's an old movie.
Then you get like that theater level acting to push it over, it's alive, like that whole scene. Like that's such theater acting. And that definitely wouldn't fly today the same way, but I enjoyed the shit out of it with this. And when you talk about like a masterclass in filmmaking and like the weird things they did, like you have stuff like when they throw the guy off the windmill and it's clearly like just a dummy that's like being tossed off this thing.
Oh, yeah.
And he hits the windmill blades. Hilarious and yet awesome. I'm watching this and I'm totally cool with it. And if I paid to watch Spiral from the Book of Saw and that happened, I would be pissed, So I think it adds a lot of fun to it as well.
Yeah, my whole thing with like the progression of how films are made, where in a movie like this, you don't get to see him try, or you don't get to see his previous experiments. And you look at a movie like Human Centipede, where you get to see like the things that didn't quite work out. Like I like that that's where films have gotten to. Like they realize in storytelling, people want more. They want to identify with what the character's been through. And yeah, I just would have liked to have seen more Human Centipede type things in this movie.
Frankenpede coming soon.
Just have all the spare body parts on the side that didn't work out, that didn't attach.
Oh, Don, you said something that I wanted to bring up, where you were talking about the book and how you've since read the book. I've also read the book, and watching this again, what really confused me is that they changed Dr. Frankenstein's first name from the book. And I was like, why did they do this? Because there's a character in the movie also named Victor, and there's a character named Victor in the movie. It's like, why bother switching names? So I went online, and apparently the studio decided that the name Victor was too ethnic sounding for American audiences. Well, so they went with a different name, but then they still kept Victor as a person in the movie with that name. Like, I didn't understand at all why they made that change. I felt like it just distracted from the story.
They didn't know what to call that guy, and they were like, "Oh, here's a name. Let's just use this."
You look like a Victor.
That's pretty great.
But James, to go back what you were saying about his theatrical presence or theatrical delivery of that line. I mean, it's become such an iconic line that's connected to this film, and then of course in the second film, The Bride of Frankenstein. That I think it's grown on people. And in all honesty, I wouldn't be disappointed in a similar movie, not necessarily a reboot or a remaking of Frankenstein, but a similar movie where that type of achievement is accomplished. And if it had been Titanic, where Bill Pullman's character, they actually, when they find the Titanic, they find the location of it, and you see that they're overjoyed about it. I could see him, basically breaking out, or even stronger than he does in the film, and overjoyed that they found this thing that he had been looking for. Whenever we do something that we've been fumbling through, or we've been struggling to actually accomplish, hardly ever do we sit there like, it's over, I did it. More likely than not, it's you're elated about it. You're excited. So I could honestly see a film doing that line or delivering a line like that with the same type of enthusiasm and it working.
I feel like they'd use more music and everything else leading up to it to push it, and so it would tone it down. But what were you going to say, Thomas?
Oh, they are remaking Frankenstein again.
They're piecing him back together. That's cool.
It's going to be directed by James Wan, who I don't know how you feel about that, James, but Javier Bardem is going to be the monster.
I'm sold.
I completely forgot about that. Yeah.
Cool.
So that could be good. I don't know, but we'll see.
But
is
when
he
you
going to
talk
have
about
an air gun
and a windmill, when you talk about the line and how it's just this thing that's part of our culture, basically. I made a joke earlier about Mickey's Monster Musical, but they use the line in Mickey's Monsters Musical. It's this Disney little kid show that my daughter watches, and literally they open a door and it's door number 5, and he yells, "It's a 5!" And I don't know, like, it's so ingrained that we make jokes with it. And my daughter runs around all the time yelling, "It's a 5," and it makes me laugh. So I just had to share that.
So the It's Alive connection in Bride of Frankenstein, is that when they create the bride? Because I haven't seen that one, or at least I don't remember it. Do they have to reanimate Frankenstein at the beginning too, because he dies at the end of this one?
No.
He spoiler for those of you who haven't seen it.
Spoiler for next week.
Yeah. He survives because he, I guess, falls down underneath the windmill where there actually is like water and everything. So there's this big open space that he's been in while people are on the outside waiting for the windmill to burn down. And then the father of Maria, he's curious because, I mean, he follows the same type of thing I do with movies. If you don't see them die, they're not dead. So he wants confirmation, and then you go and you realize, oh shit, Frankenstein's monster is still alive.
Imagine that 1932 writer's room where they're trying to figure out how to bring him back to life, and then some guy's like, "What if there's a hole in the floor?" They're like, "That's fucking great. Let's do it."
It's probably more like some guy who was funding the whole thing was just like, "There's a hole in the floor. He's fine. Whatever. Move on."
Here's money. Take the money. Make another movie.
But I mean, we do that all the time, right? Like, how many times has Jason died? And no, it's fine. It's like, Jason.
I think it's a similar thing with Jason, though, because the first one, they didn't know if it was going to be successful, and then it was. So they had to, like, figure out how to bring him back to life, right? Or just it's a whole different Jason. I don't know the entire history of it, but, like, this movie, I looked it up because I always look it up. It made $12 million in the box office. That's a lot for 1931. So I imagine they were like,
translate to today. Holy crap!
I don't know, but the budget for the movie was only $260,000. So, I mean, and that all went
bring it back to life.
All of that money went into Tesla coils and lightning logic. It's the same like lightning logic from Back to the Future. Like, oh, we have to harness the lightning because that's what's going to give us life. Like, how did they fucking know that? Like, where does that come from?
This is the exact time. Oh, yeah? Which second, Doc? Doesn't matter. But, yeah.
It's nonsense.
And that's the key right there, right? Like, but that's what makes me laugh about it, because it's always because science. And that's like the whole explanation. Like, how do you know this works? Because science. How did you bring Frankenstein to life? Science. How did you it's such a bullshit caveat, and I love it, because when you actually start explaining it, I'm bored out of my fucking mind, so I must be fine with but science.
But science back then wasn't anything like in particular regarding, it was just like doodads and knobs. Like, look at these knobs, they create science. And that's what that whole scene is.
Which is oddly how Texas feels about knobs and why they're getting rid of them all.
I hope that joke's still relevant in a month when this comes out.
Of course they don't. They got rid of the knobs.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be. Just change the joke to Mississippi, because if not them, it'll be Alabama.
Anyway, hey, we'll see how this recall goes in California. It could be California also.
Ooh. Yes, we did record this a month ago.
Well, with the money, just to give the I guess the updated monetary value, when we're talking about $12 million in I guess what was it, 1932, 1931?
31, yeah.
It's $250 million.
Holy shit!
By comparison.
Wow.
That's wild.
It would be as if this movie made $239 million.
Imagine being the idiot that killed Frankenstein. I mean, that would be like if you, I don't know, left the Joker alive and killed Two-Face.
Do we want to talk about like the deeper meaning we find in this movie, or do we want to just round out just talking about how this movie affected popular culture and where we're at today?
I mean, we could do both. I mean, I think really getting into the central. Not necessarily central arguments, because it's been so long. It's been 90 years. There's a lot that's changed as far as our outlook towards those things. There's been a lot of scientific advancements. But I mean, one of the central arguments, whether we're talking about Mary Shelley's book or we're talking about this film, is man's quest to achieve God's status, or in order for men to get into the sciences, or I'm sorry, the battle between ethics and morality when it comes to something like this. What is the line?
Are you talking about the actions of the Doctor, or are you talking about just
Dr. Frankenstein?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same argument we had during the Jurassic Park episode. You should check that episode out if you haven't listened to it already. But we have a big man becoming God conversation in that, unless James cut it all out.
It's hard to say. Nobody knows. Go check out the episode.
Well, and then speaking of cutting things out, to piggyback on the stuff about God, Don, that you brought up earlier about him comparing himself to God. Mm-hmm. This was production code. It was I think that was in 1934. They started regulating things. So, places had the option of censoring things. So this movie was like widely censored because of the violence, primarily the dead girl. But there was a ton of action from the religious community about that line where he says, like, oh, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God. Like the state of Kansas cut 32 scenes from this movie, and that feels like it was probably the whole movie. Like I don't know.
Come see 15 minutes of Frankenstein.
But for them to be able to do that back then, and nowadays you can't really do that. And if you try to censor a movie, you almost get into a war with Korea kind of thing. But like back then, you could just chop whatever you wanted to out of movies. Like, and it's all like the Eastern Seaboard, like Mass and Pennsylvania and New York. Like they were cutting tons of stuff out of all of the movies of this time because they didn't think it was appropriate for audiences. And now there's movies like Spiral where I don't want to get into those traps in that one, but we've come a long way in 90 years as far as what we're willing to watch and what we're willing to regulate about.
Yeah, because the stuff that gets regulated now, it seems to be at in smaller markets. It's not a statewide thing. It's not a citywide thing. Because one example I can think of was when Beauty and the Beast, the live action version had come out, and this one theater cut the scene or refused to show the movie because there happened to be a same-sex kiss, which I find odd because you're talking about a movie that involves bestiality, but the two men kissing was the problem.
I don't think it's bestiality. They only kiss. If that's bestiality, I've kissed, my dog 1,000 times. So, where do we go with that?
That was just on Friday.
Where's the line? And how do we even know if the beast's genitalia lined up with Belle's genitalia? There's no way to know because it wasn't a scene in the movie.
I'm impressed. Good work. You managed to fit it in, just like genitalia that lines up. So,
speaking of fitting it in, go ahead.
Go ahead. No. You go. You're the guest.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Please continue.
Well, I was just gonna ask, so when we brought you on for this, I gave you a choice of the movies that we were doing, and you picked this one, and I just wanted to know why this one in particular. Was there anything special there, or was it, hey, I've seen that one, or what?
It's the one I've seen the most and the one I think about the most, I think. I also wanted to piggyback it with another movie, and you said no, and we were already locked into Frankenstein, so I went with it. But no, I love Boris Karloff. I just love what this movie has. I love that this is a movie that's been parodied and the story's been stolen so many times, and even the story of the book and how the book was written is interesting to me. So I think, and I also think that for a movie like Dracula or Swamp Thing or any of those other older monster movies, there's character development that's okay, but for me the character development of the monster is really ahead of its time. As somebody who works in the mental health field, I know you guys can relate that it is what they do with the monster and how he reacts to certain situations is 20, 30 years ahead of the theory about it. And that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't fully understand what you're saying with that. But I mean, I definitely saw it myself from working with either kids with disabilities or adult with disabilities or whatever else. But just kind of tell me how that hits you personally, or however you want to say it.
For me, when I watch The Monster, I immediately think of attachment disorder. And that's a theory that didn't come out until the 50s. Of course, attachment disorder has been around since the dawn of time, but it wasn't really given a name or given a diagnosis until the 50s. So to watch this in the 30s, I don't know if they realized they were doing it, but all of the actions of the monster are really indicative of the attachment disorder. When he's born, he's created by the doctor, and he reaches out for him. Like he identifies like, you are my creator. And I want to be accepted by you. And what happens to him? He gets shunned. He gets locked away and he gets mistreated. And what does somebody with attachment disorder do when they're shunned? They act out, and then it stunts their development. It stunts their mental growth. It stunts their social skills. And you see all of that happen to the monster when he's locked up downstairs, when he goes outside, when he meets somebody and he just wants to have a connection with them and he doesn't know how to do it. And he ends up killing them, I mean, that is an extreme example of attachment disorder, but it's all there. And I'm curious, James, what did you see when you saw that?
No, I completely agree. Like, I can't say it better than you just said it. The other thing for me is he reaches up for like the rays of sunlight that are coming in, and he doesn't get anything there either. And I think that's also very symbolic. Like, if you push it to humans, it's kind of like reaching for God or reaching for something greater, and there's nothing there. And he's reaching for his parents, for lack of a better term, and there's nothing there. And then throughout the thing, he's like hearing that he was a mistake. Right. Like he got the wrong brain, and so he's not even good enough. Like, but that whole, it's not uncommon for humans to, like, a dad to be like, oh, I had a kid, this is great, but spend no time with them and not do anything, right? And not be involved or even talk to them. Like there's thousands of people that don't even know who their dad was, but and you really get that. But what the monster has is he literally watches it happen. And that hit me. It was, most people don't have to deal with that, And,
it's for me, it's that same kind of thing where he is like a Lenny in Of Mice and Men,
yes.
Or he is like a baby rattlesnake that can't control his venom. There's nobody there to like facilitate and help him, and that's something that's only happened in the last, our generation and maybe our parents' generation. The acceptance of people who are considered or would have been considered like the monster to have been a burden, right? So they don't take the effort. The doctor basically makes him realizes it's not something that he wants, and he's like a mother hamster who eats her young, right? Like it's just, he just immediately rejects it. And I think that what you're saying about how he reaches up for the light and he doesn't even get anything there, like his whole life is just looking for that acceptance.
I guess the one upside is if you put the two movies together, his life wasn't that long. But no, I'm kidding. But no, it really struck me this time. Like I said, I didn't overly pay attention in the past, but I went back and rewatched him reaching for the sunlight because I thought that was such a deep moment, and it's fast. They don't really concentrate on it, but I was like, that says so much to me. Like, he's like, sunlight is like a normal life, whereas he's inside the castle, or like just all these different things were flowing into me with like the symbolism of reaching for this thing you can't have.
Yeah.
Well, it's that, and it's also the deprivation of all that stuff. So, I forgot the other individual's name, but he's telling, I keep wanting to say Victor Frankenstein. He's telling Henry Frankenstein, Dr. Hank, that, we've kept him in the dark and we haven't done that. The whole idea that you have deprived him of everything, as Thomas brought up, the physical contact is the first thing. And then the utter rejection as far as talking about how this is a mistake, shouldn't have done this, questioning this whole, imagine telling that to a kid or having a kid walk in when you're discussing it with their mother or their father, whoever, and like, it was a mistake to have kids. How the fuck is that kid going to think about that? And yeah, he does have stunted development because he is virtually a new being, a new life, despite being reanimated. He is a new life and a new being. And beyond the ethics of creating this new being that Frankenstein does not give two shits about, there's also the ethics that are involved in what do you do with this being once you have it. And he completely abandons. He wants nothing to do with it. And even when they drug him to all right, let's cut him up and let's see how all this shit works. And I'm thinking to myself, like, didn't kill him. But then I, of course, smart aleck me, I responded to myself. I'm like, well, can you kill something that's already dead? Did it actually exist? And other than that, is anybody even going to give a shit about this thing that has been created for the purpose of scientific experimentation?
So you're saying that they should have aborted it and then experimented on what was left behind.
Well, I think this would have been under 6 weeks. So according to some states,
hey, we don't know what the law will be in a month.
No, I'm just saying, according to some people.
He took a breath and his lungs were full of oxygen. That is a living human being.
Well, technically several.
But I also want to point out that the instinct to kill the monster is generally the right instinct, right? We've seen Splice. We know what happens when you don't terminate the monster.
But then the question then becomes this, though, Thomas. And I wrote down, nature versus nurture, because with the two films combined, you see there is this change that takes place. Where in the first film he's neglected, in the second film, that talk about that when on that episode. But you kind of question what someone's course or what the course of this being's life is if Dr. Frankenstein from the beginning raises it. You look at something like Edward Scissorhands, which could easily be a Frankenstein movie, right? The doctor wants to take care of him, or the Vincent Price's character wants to take care of Edward so much that, Edward is an experiment, but then he realized, like, oh shit, I shouldn't have given you scissors for hands. I've gone ahead and I've created real hands for you. So here you go. And oh shit, I died. I can't put them on you.
It's a mistake that a lot of people have made.
The only thing that Henry Frankenstein gave the monster in this were those awful weighted boots he couldn't run in. So
that's better than so that hands, you could get away.
Scissors.
Check out our episode on Edward Scissorhands.
Don, you said something just casually the other day in our group chat, and I was thinking about it, like, what could he have meant? And I think I figured out what you might have meant, and I wanted to know if I was right.
Okay.
So we were talking about this movie and what we were like, kind of what we were going to talk about. And Don, you brought up, the relation to this and Donald Trump, like the Donald Trump people. So I was like, what the fuck did he mean? Like, what does that mean? Like, and I think what I think you meant was that in this case, Dr. Frankenstein is the GOP. It's right-wing people. And then Donald Trump is the monster. He's this amalgamation of all these things that they wanted to put into one thing. And he just became a monster instead of a successful politician. Is that?
Well, I mean, yeah, and he also didn't get hugged as a kid, so you can see how this works.
And he doesn't hug his children, his male children.
And we're only sure about one female child that he is affectionate with.
But is that what you meant?
That is what I was getting at. Yeah, the whole idea that we're going to go ahead and embrace this guy, or we're going to create this guy, right? Or at least use him. And then when the time comes, we can't fucking turn it off. We can't kill this thing. And someone did make a joke. I can't remember if it was on The Daily Show or one of these other, maybe it was Stephen Colbert. They made a joke about this during the 2016 election when he won the nomination. And there were other candidates who had dropped out. They were like, well, I'm not ready to, to give my full support behind Donald Trump and whoever it was, whether it was Jon Stewart or whether it was Stephen Colbert, whoever it was who made the comment said, no. Remember, you're the party that believes in carrying things to full term. So this is yours. Now go with it. Because in the words of Wanda Sykes, you fucked up twice. One, by supporting him, and then two, listening to us. But for me, what it comes down to is a monster gets created, and whether we're talking about Trump or we're talking about Frankenstein's monster. A monster gets created. It doesn't get shaped he doesn't get instruction on how to properly behave in civil society, right? So he doesn't know what to do. Now, I'm not excusing any of Trump's behavior, but because you don't rein somebody in, because you don't groom somebody for whatever they're supposed to be doing, anything they do is seen as valid, right? And it's seen on that person as opposed to Dr. Frankenstein should have accountability. He should be held accountable for this monster getting created and the destruction that it creates. And we don't see that to make the political comparison. We don't see the GOP being held accountable for the shit that they condoned while he was in and while he's still running around saying crazy shit while, just being out and about and possibly putting more people's lives at risk than the ones that he's already put at risk. So yeah, for me, it is a monster that has been roaming the countryside with a microphone, a megaphone, dog whistles, train horns, whatever you want to call it. And instead of having the Bride of Frankenstein, what we now have are like the children and cousins and extended family of Frankenstein, where shit is getting crazier and crazier.
Did you say that we have like a young version of Frankenstein?
No, I'm not going to say that.
It's not his name. Go ahead, say his name. I need money.
No.
Don, I agree with what you're saying. There's one thing I disagree about.
Okay.
At the end, when the monster kills a little girl and the whole town is like, we got to kill this guy. Dr. Frankenstein is on board. He's like, yeah, we got to kill this guy. But the GOP would have been like, come on, he's like a day old. He doesn't know any better, right? And unless you're Mitt Romney, who might be like, hey, you know what? Maybe he shouldn't have done that. I think
but that's also the whole thing of Frankenstein is going with the crowd at this moment because it is him trying to avoid accountability. Now, if it were the Republicans themselves that were like, there was enough groundswelling within their normal support to say like, hey, you guys really need to do something about this guy. You would have seen them flip and vote for a conviction on the impeachment as opposed to, hey, it was a tour. Nothing really happened. Come on. You guys are crazy. So I see him taking responsibility at that moment, but then also kind of just changing with the wind. As far as like, if I go ahead and go with them, I'm not going to be seen as the bad guy in this situation because I'm trying to do something. And in fact, even tries to fight the monster and gets his ass kicked and thrown off of a windmill.
But isn't he there because he the monster hurts him and then he goes back to terminate him and then he realizes his assistant was killed or his his mentor was killed by the monster and he's like, okay, I got to take care of this now. And then in that time is when the monster's outside killing the little girl. So I think he's on the same page as the crazy townsfolk, right? I don't think he's trying to save his own skin in that moment.
I don't know. I think he's trying to cover his ass because for me, it doesn't seem, well, one, he doesn't seem as enthusiastic about it as he was when he created the monster, right? Which, it's understandable. But even when it comes to hunting the thing down, it's not like, oh, I'm going to take charge and do this. It's all my responsibility. All you townsfolk, you hang back. I'm going to go do this myself. It's kind of like, well, there are a shitload of us. Let's do this.
It's like when you spend the time and the money to make dinner and for a group and you make a bad dinner and you're like, shit, this isn't very good. I'm just going to cut my losses and throw it away. But it's my burden. Just let me do it. I know there's a lot of people here. You don't have to do it. But it's that kind of laziness. Should we eat it? We've spent all this time making it. Do we want to kill the monster? Lightning storms once a year. Are we going to wait another year to try again at this? We should probably just keep this thing. My thought, how much have I invested? How am I going to replicate this again? We can domesticate the monster.
Well, you know what? If this had been because I will concede on one point, because if this had been the GOP, they would have been blaming little Maria for dying as opposed to the monster for killing her. And they would have asked for her report cards and attendance records and everything from her school. And then basically,
Don, you have no idea the conversations I've had today about that. It's insane. I know this is going to come out a month from now, but that whole thing that came out about that in Sandy Hook is nonsense to me. And we don't have to get into it, but I understand what you're talking about.
No. And I bring that up for a reason. And this doesn't have to be timed because this is something that has taken place for a while, right? So if we were even to make the comparison between gun violence and Frankenstein's monster, right? Gun manufacturing companies, gun lobbyists, all these people have created this big fucking monster in this country to where every fucking idiot thinks that they can have, and I'm sorry, again, I got to apologize to people because I'm going to do a rant again. Any fucking idiot out there thinks that the Second Amendment means I can have whatever the fuck I want. I can have whatever type of gun I want. But we have several court cases that argue the other. And we're talking about conservative judges that have argued that you can't have whatever you want. And the individual right to own a gun is not protected. But because it's been so unchecked, because there's been so much money that's changed hands, that you see that gun violence is Frankenstein's monster in this country, to where people want to do something, but then there are people that are standing in the way and making an argument as to why we shouldn't do something. And, whether they want to admit it's their creation or not, it's something that they're fully invested in maintaining, because the monster that they created has given them some security. And also it keeps them from being held accountable.
But what are they looking for in a child's like school history? Like, are they going to be like, oh, little Sally was in first grade. She couldn't read very well. Is that a life worth living? Right? Like, oh, we reprimanded Billy because he called a girl icky. He could have been an incel school shooter. You know, is that the same thing with a little girl at the lake? Like, oh, she lives next to a lake, but she never fucking learned how to swim. She had it coming. You know, like, is that where we're at right now as people?
That's where some people in our society are, unfortunately.
And others are actively trying to kill the child themselves.
Yes.
Right. And then there's people like me who get all of the monster?
Yeah, why does he get blamed for throwing this girl in? My uncles threw me in pools all the fucking time. That wasn't on them. I had to find my way out of this.
I had the same thought. Like, how do we know the girl just didn't wade in there and, you know, got in a situation she couldn't get out? Like, they just assume... And they're just profiling the monster. Like, that's a whole other thing that goes on. Like, he doesn't look like the rest of them, so clearly he did something wrong.
See, that I can buy. But this
well, you don't see that process.
I don't know what's going on here.
You're making assumptions watching it. Like, you don't see any of that happen in the...
And if Thomas doesn't mind, I'm going to ask this question.
Well, I guess I don't have a choice. Go on.
Do the dead have rights?
Like the ones he's made out of?
Or in current society?
That in general. Because we often talk about the sanctity of the dead, or honoring the dead, respecting the dead, things like that. But do they have rights, or or just perceived rights that we should, I guess, honor?
I think if you're religious and you want to leave a body at peace, that's an ideal. I don't think it's a right. I think that, I mean, from a legal point of view, I think when you die, you're no longer a person. Your body is just the property of your family or whatever, wherever you end up. If it's at a college where they teach surgeons how to cut up a body or whatever it is. So I think that when you dig up a grave like they do in this movie and they take a body, you're really only violating the rights of the people who are left behind by that body. That's how I feel about it.
Okay.
And for me, I'd rather just, if somebody wants a body, there should be a way to do that, right? I am in the process of getting older and waiting for my parents to die and figuring out where I'm going to put them, right? So if somebody was like, hey, I need a body to do this experiment, I'd be like, hey, I don't mind. It sounds like a cool thing. Go for it. Like it's my right to decide where that goes, right? I don't know. You get into a more existential thing where Don, when you die, do you feel like your body has rights? Like, do you feel like so a part of you is left behind, and therefore you still, as a deceased person, have human rights?
And that's the thing. I don't know. I have an idea of what I would like to happen with my remains, but I don't see it other than like defiling my corpse. There's really
I will do what I want. Thank you.
There's really nothing that I look at and like, well, that would be because I don't like the funeral industry. I don't like I don't like the people that use the funeral industry to exploit people. Because there are good people in the funeral industry, but I don't like when people exploit or take advantage of the grief of a family in order to make a shitload of money off of it. And there's part of me that also doesn't like the idea that we have all this land that we decide that we're going to put dead bodies in and do nothing else with.
Right. Cemeteries are a huge waste. The cemeteries and golf courses. I'm like, can't we just make it both? Let's combine the two. I don't mind chipping over a gravestone. Might not be the right angle to take on this. The one thing I want to say about dying and what happens to our bodies, I hope, because I can't swim, I hope that I drown in a lake like this little girl, and then James carries me through town wailing and crying.
That's not going to happen.
Who does that? Who picks up their dead daughter and just walks around town like, hey, come check out my dead child? Like, there's better ways to go up.
I'll tell you exactly. The father that held her underwater and blamed the monster. That's who.
Thank you. God damn it, James.
You bring up a great point. I never even considered it. Maybe he just killed that. He left her alone to begin with. He clearly was not. He had 1 foot out the door the whole movie.
He was literally like, all right, Daddy's going to go have an alibi.
It's like, oh, here's a weird guy in town. That's somebody I can pin this murder on.
There you go. That's our bold horror statement of the day. The father killed the little girl. I'm still not carrying you through the town. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, James, what do you think? Do you think a deceased body has rights?
I'm sure there is a legal answer to this that I do not know, but no, not exactly. I believe that somebody is technically in ownership of the body. So whether that's a family member or it's like maybe you became a ward of the state after you passed, whoever, somebody somewhere has a legal right over the body. And so it almost becomes a property crime. Okay. I could see that being argued better because people love to protect property over people. So I feel like that would be the answer. It would be more that it's a violation for whoever's in charge of the body or whoever owns the cemetery. I think it would become a property issue.
Well, I just found a 41-page explanation of the rights of the dead from a legal point of view. I'm not going to read it all. Okay. No, but the first thing that pops up on Google, when you Google the phrase, does a dead body have rights? It says, many legal rules suggest that the dead do not have rights. Often the dead cannot marry, divorce, or vote, and the executor of an estate cannot sue for the libel or slander of a deceased person. So, James, when you die, I'm going to say some crazy shit about you in public, and there's nothing your family can do about it.
Huh, because on TikTok, they will block your entire account for talking ill about the dead. Right, Don?
I know. And then you have to find all these backdoor ways to get back onto TikTok.
Oh, backdoor is more of an only.
Wow.
Am I supposed to edit that one or not? Anyway, continue. So they don't have rights. That's the point. They themselves do not have rights. That's what you're saying.
Right, and it sounds like the family doesn't have a lot of rights either. So
interesting.
Well, speaking of rights,
I suppose that makes sense. Really fast, I suppose that makes sense because, if I died, my wife could decide. No matter what I said, she could decide if I was buried or cremated. So yeah, I guess you don't have any rights because you can't even trust that.
And I mean, to piggyback off of that, here's what I find interesting about this whole thing, right? When we're talking about rights and privilege, and I mentioned the whole idea the whole aspect that Frankenstein isn't held accountable, right? He's even seen as sympathy. The town has sympathy for him. Because he's gone to fight the monster and he gets thrown off the windmill and he lands on one of the blades of the windmill before he hits the ground, which is I laugh my ass off when I watch. And they're sympathetic towards him, but I think part of it has to deal with one, this monster that exists, but then two, he's got a lot of money, he's got a name, so I think part of the reason why he gets away with this is because of his status within that town and with the money that he has, or at least the privilege that he has. Whereas if this had been, let's flip it as like Maria's dad. He's reanimating a dead body. He reanimates, right? He's going to be seen as a monster before Henry Frankenstein is seen as a monster. And part of that has to go with, his standing within that town. So I don't know what the two of you might have thought about as far as wealth, privilege, notoriety coming into play with this.
I personally hadn't considered it. I like that theory a lot. I think it makes a ton of sense. I think it's also, it just comes down to, I looked at you and you're one of us. Mm-hmm. So if they were going to hold him accountable, they'll wait because there's a real threat right now. There's an outsider and he's terrifying and we got to deal with that. Instead of, hey, why the fuck did you do that? Which is what you should ask people who bring the dead to life. Hey, why the fuck did you do?
I found the social aspect of the movie to be the most unsuccessful part of it. I found the Baron to be very annoying. I didn't care for the love story. None of it really added anything to me. And I feel like, if there was more connection with them and the town, I feel like the town didn't even know what he was doing. Like, most of those people probably didn't even know that this monster came from him, right? Why would they?
That's a good point. I withdraw what I said. You're right. It's not like he was updating his Facebook status. Brought him to life. Here's a video.
He's not like, Tesla up on the hill creating power for the whole city. He's just this guy in this like old castle, right?
Well, even if they knew what he was doing, right? They would just look at it as, man, that's rich people shit. Of course he's doing that. That's the type of thing that people do when they have too much money and too much time on their hands. Or they looked at it as, he's a very smart guy, so of course he's going to try to do something like that.
But in their wildest dreams, as milkmaidens and farmers, would they think that he up there doing crazy things meant bringing a human back to, or creating life? Do you think that they probably just thought he was fucking around with electricity or something, right? Like
more than likely, that's what they thought. As far as he's doing these weird experiments with lightning, because he doesn't want anybody to know what he's doing there.
He's got this weird little helper that's always with him. And they must be close to a bigger town because that's where the university was at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I want to point out, I thought very progressive to have a university with women in it.
Yeah,
I know that sounds sexist, but for me, it's like, wow, there's women in college in the 1930s, and to be learning about something like brains and medical science. I just thought it was I took a moment and thought, hey, that's pretty cool.
Well, there you go.
I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, they must have been close to a town though, like a bigger town, not just the village that the monster ends up at. There must be a map somewhere online. A fan made a map of this area. It's supposed to be in Bavaria, right? Something European like that.
Yeah, it's supposed to be in Germany.
Germany, or maybe I'm thinking of Willy Wonka. Both of those movies, I think, are in Germany. Both creating monsters. I have a big pet peeve with this movie, not just the movie, but the book as well, is that it's created an entire generations of people who refer to monsters as Frankenstein. And then it's a whole other generation of people like us who feel the need to correct those people and be like, well, actually, Frankenstein was the doctor's.
And then there's people that are just annoyed by that,
right.
like me.
And then there's the people that write into the library books that say, hey, do you mind if people call me Frankenstein instead of the monster? No, I don't mind. It's cool. No, just me? Okay.
Just you.
Well, here's something that I've heard before, and we can talk about it. We talked about this a little bit with Jurassic Park, where are the dinosaurs the monsters, or is InGen the monsters for creating the dinosaurs, right? So you could say it's like Frankenstein, and Dr. Frankenstein himself is kind of a monster. So it fits the category of we're still referring to something that's monstrous and bad. We just might not be thinking of the same thing. So the next time you say, it'll be a Frankenstein, and they're like, well, actually, it's Frankenstein's monster, you could be like, fuck you, I'm talking about that crazy doctor. He was the real monster in that story.
And that's how you dig yourself out easily.
You're probably never going to talk to that person again after that either.
I never want to talk about this movie ever again.
Oh, you're such a liar. Yes, you do.
Do you guys have anything else? Because I had one more question for you guys.
Oh, go ahead, man.
I just want to know what your favorite Frankenstein type movie is, where somebody brings something back to life. If you have one off the top of your head, for me, it's Jurassic Park, of course. I also love Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. It's very similar to what happens in this. I just want to get your take on that.
All right. Well, for me, that would have to be Weird Science.
Yeah, you know what? I was thinking that you might go that. I was wondering if you would say that or like Encino Man.
Oh, God, I've completely forgot about that movie.
But no, Weird Science is a great one.
No, I'm just kidding.
Weird Science is a great one.
I really don't know.
I guess this kind of ruins what you guys usually do at the end, where you give recommendations, similar things, but
we're still gonna do that.
I've got several sitting right here that would be in that same one. Which the other one I would mention is, I guess, a little known film, Eve of Destruction, where the government builds this woman cyborg thing. And it's kind of the same thing as Frankenstein, where she leaves and she has to discover what humanity is like. But because they used one of the doctors as a psychological profile to build the android thing, whatever, she responds negatively to certain things. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it and is interested in seeing it, but it just becomes this thing of she has to be found, or else all hell is going to break loose.
That sounds pretty cool. I haven't seen that.
All right, so I guess that brings us to movie recommendations. So, Thomas, would you like to go first?
Sure, I can. And all of these movies I'll recommend have a soundtrack, not like Frankenstein, where there's just no music the whole time, which really takes away from the tone of a movie. But what would I recommend? There's some classic bringing things to life movies, like Ex Machina is a classic that people love.
So I do this double feature thing because Don has 93 different movies he's going to recommend. So mine's super easy today because I'm going with Bride of Frankenstein because it's next week's episode, and because what other double feature can you possibly do here that isn't perfect? So there you go. Don, you're up.
All right. I'm going to start off with The Isle of Dr. Moreau. I'm going to piss
Which
James
one?
off with either one of them, even the one with that's the thing. It just depends on what you're looking for. I'm going to piss off James with this next one, which is The Avengers: Age of Ultron.
It's not my fault
It's
it was a shitty movie.
It's a Frankenstein movie, dude. Young Frankenstein, weird science. Eve of Destruction, like I said earlier. The Fly, a great horror comedy, a lot more comedy than horror. The Man with Two Brains with Steve Martin.
Oh, that's a great one.
Let's see, Freaks, The Invisible Man. As far as classic ones, The Invisible Man, King Kong. We've already talked about Jurassic Park, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Godzilla, Frankenweenie.
Yes. Nice.
The Munsters, not necessarily the movies, just go with the TV shows. And of course, the dancing scene in that movie sparked my I was compelled to just go ahead and say National Lampoon's European Vacation. And last but not least, we can't talk about, this coming back from the dead without mentioning probably the best zombie movie of all time, The Passion of the Christ.
There you go.
God damn.
It's a good one.
You guys forgot to mention Splice.
No, we didn't.
There's one thing I want to tack on to what you said, Don, about Island of Dr. Moreau. If you watch the more recent one, the one directed by Richard Stanley, I recommend before you watch it, watch the documentary about it. It's called Lost Soul. It's about the doomed journey of making that movie. It's fascinating how crazy that movie was behind the scenes. So if you have the time and you're interested in bad movies and how they're made, that documentary is.
I guess that wraps it up for this week then. So until next time, I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And Thomas will be back at some point to do Young Frankenstein.
And I think we have a Treehouse of Horror this year as well.
That's true. We're like a month away from a Treehouse of Horror. And I say that not knowing if I mean a month from September when we're recording this, or a month from October when it's supposed to air, but baseball gets in the way. Thomas, you've done all the other Treehouse of Horror episodes. People should go check them out. Blah, blah, blah. All the stuff we normally say here. See you next week on thenecronama.com.